I think this is an interesting one. A way we have, Too Big to Succeed is our little working title for our document in a few different ways, right? Because obviously it's, big Bethesda game. I think now there's a little bit more suspicion from people. Also too big to succeed, rather literally. The headline number of 1,000 planets has got out there. And I think now we're in a situation where that has actually massively went past where I think Bethesda sees this into this new discourse that is dominating the game that basically comes down to it's like No Man's Sky, but it's more photoreal and boring. And that does not seem to have a tremendous amount of basis in most of how they've actually presented the overall game.
Yeah, well.
But, I mean, yeah, it's interesting. So I think actually what they showed off was very strong. I have a feeling definitely. A bunch of people maybe just have an attention span that only lets them watch the first 4 or 5 minutes of the 15-minute presentation, the middle and back half of which has rich environments with lots of color and loads of diversity. So it's a funny little situation. And also it's an interesting showing for the creation engine. So let's talk about that gameplay trailer, because yeah, it is creation engine, but I mean, ultimately with an engine, what is an engine? It is just a set of tools. I think a lot of people think about engines in a very monolithic way, but that's not necessarily how things are. Yeah. So in this case, I think we're seeing the parts of the creation engine that have been very, not very much updated. I mean, in 76, had a lot of issues, but some aspects of like its lighting and the actual creation tools for the world did seem to have went on quite far. Here we are seeing, still slightly dead eyes, but at least character models and animations that are well above what Bethesda usually does. Which is not to say they're fantastic, but it's well above what they usually do.
Yeah, so I think the thing about the engine talk when it comes to that is very much, people don't expect all Unreal Engine games to play the same. People don't expect all Unity games to play the same. People who think that or say that are very clearly told off immediately for thinking that way.
Yeah.
And kind of corrected. But for Bethesda games, it kind of comes down to the fact that obviously people are kind of aware of an engine doesn't necessarily inform how everything goes. But in Bethesda's case, a lot of it is, we can tell you've been using Gamebryo, you've been using the creation engine. All of your games have had similar feel and similar problems. They've had similar successes in how interactive the worlds can tend to be, especially thinking back to the Skyrim bucket on head, shopkeeper can't see. That's funny, but it is a cool interaction.
Yeah.
But that's the kind of thing that people will rail on it more because of negativity bias. And then also they'll see they'll watch Starfield and see, I recognize that bit of movement or that bit of button pressing or that bit of how gunplay looks from Fallout 4. It's just going to be the same as Fallout 4. And that's not necessarily true, but it's kind of like a confirmation bias thing of seeing it and going, well, Fallout 4 was just a slightly better Fallout New Vegas, which was a slightly better Fallout 3 in terms of engine. So without actually being hands-on, people are kind of just sort of almost coerced by how everything actually is in the industry into assuming this is just going to be, it's going to be a slightly better version of Fallout in space, which is just going to be down to the proof in the pudding, really.
At the very least, it does immediately look significantly better visually.
It looks substantially better,
than what we're used to, right? It does look like a modern game, so that's at least a good thing. I suppose for the other things then, so a lot of this reminded me of essentially single-player Star Citizen, so much more than somebody would say single-player No Man's Sky. I guess the whole No Man's Sky multiplayer is its own thing. But yeah, some aspects of the loop. So we start off going to a rocky planet that's not particularly, inhabited. And that's an interesting thing, because I think for some people it's like, okay, well, it's not a beautiful, lush, super colorful world like you're going to get in No Man's Sky, therefore it's bland and boring. But for a lot of people, especially when you kind of look at this, where even they've positioned it this way, it's like, this is NASA, we are big fans of NASA, and that kind of whole vibe and aesthetic, but significantly more in the future. And if you actually want to land that, emotional experience for a player who resonates with that, it does kind of have to feel like you are stepping onto a plausible uninhabited rocky planet. Right? So to me, so far, I really like the art direction. I really like how the worlds look. That is how I would want them to look in a game like this. When I like drop down to a place in Star Citizen to do a mission or like go to a POI or something, one of the things that makes that feel cool is that it genuinely does look just like a world. So I guess that's one funny thing. There's like a lot of, I'll just jump straight to it. Like the whole, PC Gamer, Starfield is just ugly No Man's Sky, period. And I mean, PC Gamer, that totally just feels like you're doing a Kotaku style tweet, right? Like that's pretty reductive. But then it's interesting because that just seems to be the shorthand of how people are actually now communicating about this game.
Well, that's
which is then really funny because you actually look at the trailer and it's like, are people talking about some sort of lush jungle world with a big cool alien in it? Or like this more creepy scene of like, alien creature like running through a corridor, the various different like towns, outposts. I put the same image in twice, whoops, the more cyberpunkish looking area. So it does seem to me that while we do have these like obviously big, using procedural generation worlds, that there are locations that are more like Bethesda locations. So essentially I would imagine that you're getting like a proper, Bethesda style rich world sort of spread out across this, but then a humongous amount of exploration content and stuff like that as you go around all these worlds. And it's like, 1,000 worlds, that's more than you're probably ever going to, really experience or whatever. But one of the things when people are comparing, say, Outer Worlds to the Bethesda Fallout games is that like Outer Worlds kind of suffers a little bit from its scale, from not having like the big empty space. You look at Skyrim, there's a lot of empty space in Skyrim, and same for Oblivion. That empty space is really important to selling how that world feels. So if you want to sell the overall gameplay aesthetic as being this kind of like NASA successor Explorer, you do actually have to have a lot of that.
Yeah, I mean, it's just negative space, right?
Yeah.
It's just, if stuff is everywhere, then finding stuff doesn't matter because you're always finding stuff. It's a key to have the blend of, to explore, you need to not find stuff sometimes. Really, that's kind of the point of it. I think it sounds really simple when you think about it, but yeah, the whole point of exploring is to not find stuff, and then when you do find stuff, it feels good. The whole variable reward scheduling thing in the brain as well does all that for you, so yeah.
Yeah. So, to be honest, I thought it looked really cool. Like the idea I can just be in my custom-made ship, and I'm going down to do something on a planet, and I go down to that part of the planet, and, there I am. What we'll have to see is, the position of, say, the sun, or, the star of whatever the system you're in. Is that accurate when you're actually down on world? Because all those things that, say, Star Citizen does super well really sell that you are truly in space. It's that thing. I know a lot of people have a lot of things to say about Star Citizen. It does have many genuinely mind-blowing, like, holy fuck, I cannot believe this level of scale exists in a video game, moments when you fly down to a city that just looks like it's Blade Runner or like a Coruscant or something. Or, you go onto like some icy world and it just feels like a real place and it's really cool. So if they can achieve that and then get all of the best bits of a Bethesda, mostly first-person role-playing game, I think that's going to be super strong.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. I think it's so much of what you actually feel in terms of the actual fantasy is very hard to sell in a trailer. And I think that's what, cutting everything away from what people actually like about Bethesda games, because obviously there's people like lots of different small things about them, and, you'll have different answers from everyone. But I think if you boil down all the answers into like a kind of singular point, it would all just be people like Skyrim, they like Oblivion, they like Morrowind, they like Fallout, New Vegas 3, 4. Not sure how many people like 4 comparatively, but generally speaking, it's about the fantasy, right?
Yeah.
It's about the kind of immersive sim light in the kind of more RPG setting where you do get the interactions, you do get to kind of live out the fantasy of whatever you're trying to play. Not in the most detailed way. It's not to the same point as like a Deus Ex is like super tightly kind of molded in every way, but it's more kind of an open world version of that. And a more kind of, here's a couple systems that you can interact with that feel kind of real. I was like, actually selling that to people seemed to be the really hard part.
Yeah.
Because it's like, people can only really think in terms of, especially like the general gaming, like populace on Twitter and even like journalists and stuff, it's very hard for them to think about the overall fantasy when they don't see it or they're not playing. It's like you have to look at it from the kind of objective standpoint of what have we seen in this trailer, and they don't feel anything that's good about it. They can see all the things that are happening, but that's been completely overridden by this massive, just engorged bias in the back of their head, which is, this is a Bethesda game. It's going to be jank. They haven't made a good one in years. And that's the kind of thing that I think, like Blizzard are saying recently with Diablo 4 having some kickback from Immortal, it's like people are, sometimes they're right, sometimes they're wrong. I think it's a matter of magnitude of how much that bias is there, or how much that like existing opinions are. But people are like, it's a Bethesda game, I'm going to have to play it before I see it. You know, I don't trust this to be super really well magically put together.
Yeah.
Is it just going to be a load of AI have slapped together a bunch of quests?
Yeah, there's every chance that they could really bungle it with that. And then stuff could get boring. So to kind of go into some more of the gameplay elements then, movement seems to be impacted by gravity, so I think that'll be cool as you're going just, different planets, moons, things like that. Can offer up some fun gunplay. Like the whole thing of, a bit in the trailer where you're basically like, using your jetpack. It's kind of like raining down hell on people.
It's Destiny.
That seems kind of cool. Right, so then the combat side, if not for the enemies looking slightly like a bullet sponge, I think it would have been a strong enough showing because the animations were just fine. That it just looks like it's not quite done yet. But then, of course, it's Bethesda combat, so I imagine it is going to shape exactly as we saw it.
Yeah, it's going to be
which probably means it's going to be better than Fallout 4, and 4 was better than, I suppose, better than New Vegas, and New Vegas was better than 3. Not that New Vegas was even made by them, but you know what I mean. So I think it's probably going to be the best gunplay in a Bethesda game. Not that that is particularly saying much.
Yeah, but that's the thing, right?
But we'll just get the job done.
Yeah, because people go, okay, well, you say the gunplay in 4 was better. And that might be very much literally true in terms of how everything kind of feels mechanically speaking. But then people think, well, maybe the balance wasn't quite right for Fallout 4, or I couldn't build my character that I wanted to, so I didn't like the combat quite as much. And that's the thing where it doesn't matter how good or bad Bethesda make a game. It's about can they recreate the feeling people had playing Skyrim? Because obviously, everyone who plays Skyrim will still swear up and down it's a bad game.
Oh, it's awful combat,
And rightly so. Everyone's always looked at Bethesda games. Maybe less so Morrowind because it was so far ahead of its time in a bunch of ways. But people go, yeah, these are genuine, like these are badly implemented games in a whole bunch of ways, but none of that matters. But people kind of continually forget that or aren't able to think about it in a way. So it's like, it doesn't matter if it's actually better if it doesn't have that special thing.
Yeah, like,
and that's where the whole discourse around Bethesda games is so confusing.
Mass Effect Andromeda, awesome combat, not a great game. Funny enough, there are similarities between this game and Mass Effect Andromeda, where originally in Andromeda they wanted to have way more planets and to use procedural generation. So it's quite interesting that for them it failed, but evidently they at least think they've got it to work here. And now, of course, there's some lockpicking, little pattern games. We also notice there's some faction-based gameplay. You can join one of the 3 main factions, which quite broadly are exploration, military, and then piracy. And there's an ongoing plot thread, basically alien artifacts and visions. Kind of makes us think of Mass Effect, but we will see. And then, of course, the range of environments, right? Like, here's just a few shots from the trailer. I think people obviously saw the more like barren planet. I feel like they started with the barren planet because they wanted to make it feel like just a bit of genuine exploration, something like that. But yeah, so we've got this like jungly one. There's like different sort of towns, cities. One of them's got like a sort of cyberpunk-ish look to it. There's a shot of this town here that just it's more like a sort of more rich and vibrant. I think there's like some purple or whatever in it. So there you go, right? It just seems to be that pretty big game. Now there's kind of like 2 interesting points. There's a callback to sort of like 2 things. One of them is a mortgage, just being able to get like a 50,000 credit mortgage, a small house in a peaceful little moon. That is a reference, of course, to Daggerfall. And then also a very interesting trait is Serpent's Embrace, right? So if you decide your character is going to be a follower of the Great Serpent, which is basically a religion, it means that you've got basically an uncontrollable impulse to jump, right? So basically, if navigating one of the game's planets, you continue to use your boosters to grav jump, it will temporarily boost your health and your endurance. But if you don't jump, the serpent will be displeased, and that will lower your core stats. So it seems like they're kind of using this like little religion angle to get some more interesting perks and traits, which will be fun for people's role playing.
Yeah, that fully screams New Vegas to me.
Yeah, and that's what we want to hear.
Yeah, that's the wacky shit. That's the kind of stuff that makes these games historically feel so interesting. And I feel like a little bit of that was lost with Fallout 4, and a little bit of that was kind of lost with Skyrim as well, where Oblivion was a lot wackier. And the kind of the wackiness scales kind of went down a little bit over time. But it looks like, at least in terms of how the religions are there, they do want to have some really crazy shit that's kind of super memorable, but also kind of like, you don't want this to be a completely serious role-playing situation. Almost no games ever really are. They always have that sense of, let's see what we can do with this. What's super memorable? And I think that's a case of, hopefully this all manifests correctly. Hopefully this isn't just like, exceptions to prove the rule about everything else, because I think one of the things people are rightly afraid of when it comes to games, especially when it comes to procedural generation, is the often used term just soulless.
Yeah.
And that's a lot of what people are afraid of these big games getting bigger, these games getting made by, AI as opposed to people. Obviously, that's literally not true. It's just using AI to fill bits in. But it's like, soul can be there. It just needs to be actually,
Ultimately, if they want to do the fantasy of you land on the planet Mars and do something, what's the point in handcrafting the entire, and if they want that to be somewhere where you can just go anywhere in Mars.
Yeah.
I know there's differences in different parts of Mars, but for the most part, you can procedurally generate that. So if the proc gen's good enough, then you just get a planet. And I think in that case, it's not like they'd be intending for this planet to be like a humongous, mega rich, crazy place to go and explore. It's like, well, no, you drop in, drop out to this planet. And a part of what makes that a cool experience is that it quite literally is a massive, big planet. That that there is that space there, that there is that scale, within the game. You don't need to explore all of it. It exists there to serve the fantasy in the same way that having big open spaces in an MMO zone can make an MMO zone actually feel more like a real place, right? Comparing some of World of Warcraft's older zones that were bigger, had more open space, to some of the newer ones that have just been so dense and full of gameplay that they no longer feel like places. So really, it's like, what's procedural generation used for? Is it so that the backdrop of a lot of what you do is this really awesome scale, and that's what makes it feel real? Well, then what's the problem? Now, the problem then is if they use this procedural generation and then they think this means, okay, we throw the Radiant questing system in, now we have infinite content.
That's the problem, yeah.
Which is the worry.
And that's what a lot of people would expect, because that's how modern game development feels to people. It's infinite content that's all the same. What purpose does it serve? Not necessarily to waste your time, but to kill your time. I think that's what people are generally a little bit afraid of coming into this, because it's been a long time since Skyrim's Radiant AI questing was really transparently pointless. Will it be substantially better now, or will it not? I guess that's the big thing. That's the big thing.
Yeah, just that. And how do they actually make the content?
Yeah.
What's going to be? What's the framing going to be? Like, the Radiant system itself, pretty boring. But if you were to tie the Radiant Quest system into a dynamic Civil War system, like what some mods have created for Skyrim, then suddenly it could be interesting. It's like, okay, you do enough Radiant-driven Civil War quests, you do a whole bunch of those, push the enemy back, then you unlock a new siege or something to do. Then that sort of thing can fall into a broader game system that's more, that it's a bit more engaging. Or, you say if this, I don't know if this is the case, but if it had more of a simulated economy, and then you could do a few quests in an area that would change some of the market, then you could sell some things. That's the sort of emergent gameplay that could come out. We just don't know if it will yet. And I guess if we go to some of the... one final thing before community reactions. You are a silent protagonist. Conversations are first person. So they've very much seen what they did in Fallout 4 didn't work. Good.
Yep.
Very good.
Yeah. I mean, that ties into what Todd said at the very opening. It was like, I think there was a little bit of a reel of the main story stuff, and then him on stage saying, ultimately, it's not our story. It's the story you create by who you are and the choices you make, which is very much them going, yeah, whoops, we kind of forgot that was what our games are about. Sorry about that. This next game will be like that. Please enjoy. Which is, I don't know if Todd Howard's ever even quite as subtly admitted to a mistake they've made before.
Yeah. So as for the community reactions, pretty simple. No Man's Starfield. It's a No Man's Skyrim job. Looks like a combination of No Man's Sky, Fallout, and a bit of Mass Effect. Look, that's the easiest, communicate with some examples, I suppose. Now that said, for them, that could mean they are maybe getting some of the more negative connotations of some of those things, which obviously kind of sucks for them, but it is on them to actually prove that this is all worth it. Taking like the Lana Pierce's reaction, which I think is a pretty common one, also did humongously the rounds. I might be alone, but my near immediate reaction to There Are 1,000 Planets is way more concern than hype. I'm excited to play it for a bunch of reasons, but 1,000 just makes me think, okay, most of that's very barren, or I don't have time for that. And then I guess from my perspective, as somebody who's more of a fan of space games, because I really like space games, it's like, well, I would never expect to be asked to fully explore all of these planets. For me, it's just, this is a thing you do to truly make it feel like you are in space and it has scale.
Yeah.
You then just have to make a good game within that.
Yeah, but then I think it's because the 1,000 Planets has been used kind of as a marketing beat. And the gamers are very much trained to go, I know you're trying to sell me something. I don't think I like what you're trying to sell me. And that's kind of the problem of just communicating this stuff's really, really very difficult. And I think my reaction's most same as 1,000 planets, cool, I don't give a shit. Why should I give a shit if you've got 1,000 planets worth of content? Because that sounds to me like you haven't made 1,000 planets worth of really, really good content, because that's too much for you to make in one game.
Well, it's like
which is then, there's all the, like what you're saying, but it doesn't all have to be content. It can be backdrop. You're like, yeah, that completely fine. Completely 100%, that would be great. But does a modern gamer trust them not to stick quest markers all over every 1,000 planet? And like, uncover the map by walking around all these 1,000 planets for 5 achievement points, which is then on the side of your screen every time you play forever.
I mean, I'd imagine not.
Yeah, I'd imagine not. But that's like the worst fear people have.
Like they've made big cities.
Yeah.
And seemingly they've like made intricate play spaces, like what you would expect from a game that is made by them.
Yeah,
so it's like, because they've done that, does that not sort of inform us as to what's going on with all of these planets? I'm not sure, because we haven't fully seen it, and I suppose people are just thinking about Preston Garvey saying, another settlement needs your help. Yeah. And yeah, obviously that's going to feel weird.
Yeah, I mean, and honestly, do you expect them to do anything really different? I would very much hope not, because it seems like a very silly thing to do. But at the same time, I think the entirety of modern gaming has had that kind of push of, we know you can make content to fill our time, we now want higher quality stuff. We don't want the equivalent of extremely cheaply made video game fast food. People still do want that in a lot of cases, and there's a whole discourse over people going, well, no, I want loads of game for my money. I want to have like a couple $100 in like Horizon Forbidden West. I don't want an 8-hour story experience for $70. Go away. And the person on the other side's like, but I have limited time. And that's kind of like the split across gamers in general. And that's where this discourse is getting kind of almost, I don't want to say uncivil, but almost in that sense of, there's two people with very different, or two types of people with very different wants. And then you put that on Twitter or on Reset Era or on Reddit or wherever else, and it just gets basically a bloodbath.
Yeah, because like in my head, this is a game that looks like it has like ship customization that is really cool. Forms of progression, building your character that are really cool.
Honestly, that space combat looks amazing to me.
Big hubs with, characters, factions, and all of the stuff that the genuinely is the good thing in these games. That's all there. And then we're kind of like dipping in and out to all these planets, exploring them, exploring space. Like, to me, that pretty much seems perfect. If you want the exploration thing to really be like a core vibe of this game. But I think evidently a lot of people are going to need a lot of convincing in this one.
I mean, that's exactly it, where I would love to be able to look at what they're offering and go, oh yeah, I completely trust Todd Howard to give me a tremendous experience. It's going to be, it's going to be very much worth my money, and it'll be high quality the whole way through, and none of it will feel cheap, and there'll be no bugs because they'll have a QA team working on this QA forever. But I think most people are going, this is going to release so full of bugs it'll be basically unplayable, is I think most people's kind of default assumption.
Yeah.
And that's not even like coming with like a load of like, oh well, fuck Bethesda. And that is literally just people go, oh yeah, that's how it is. That's how it is. So they have a huge amount of work to kind of get rid of that. But I think another thing is this is like, outside of Fallout 4, this is Bethesda's first like single player game release since Skyrim or so.
Outside of Fallout 4, yeah.
Yeah. The industry's a little bit different 11 years later.
Yeah.
Well, it'll be 12 years later at the time this out. Or almost thereabout. So it's like, are they making a game that they've been designing since before Elden Ring came out? You know, are the tastes and changes of what an open world and procedural generation RPG are they going to be any different? Are people going to have higher standards than they did a couple of years ago even because of what they've seen?
Undoubtedly.
And will Bethesda be able to actually kind of have a game that's strong enough in that regard? I certainly hope so. And they wouldn't delay it if they thought it was going to come out of date. It's not like they're like, oh, we'll just make Skyrim in space and call it a day. It's going to take 10 years. Do you think it's going to change? No. So I do have a decent amount of trust in their core design, their core tenets, their core pillars. And a lot of what they've shown has kind of proven that to me. Especially in terms of like how that space combat looks. That looks like something that if they tried to implement that in the existing like Fallout 4 engine, it probably would explode. It definitely wouldn't work. But I still see people making fun of the Fallout 3 train being an NPC's hat. So that's kind of the legacy they have to shake.
Yeah.
They have to shake that legacy, and hopefully all the time they spent working on this is enough to do that.
Well, on the very bright side, they've delayed it.
Yeah.
That should mean more polish time, more bug fixing time.
Yep.
I mean, who knows? They're owned by Microsoft now. Maybe Microsoft are just more willing to delay stuff than maybe would have happened in the past. Because sure as hell, like Skyrim PS3, that shouldn't have been launched. Like that was a mistake, right?
Yeah.
Even 76 shouldn't have been launched. Needed more work.
Yep.
Perhaps the time afforded to them will actually pay off. 'Cause, I mean, if this comes out and they just kind of really nail that launch, I mean, that would just be incredible for Bethesda, because it's not like they usually nail launches in terms of sales, but not always in terms of it being a, great product by some sort of quality standards.
Yeah, there's that cynical, evil bastard inside me going, I hope this releases and is a complete dumpster fire.
No.
I want a Chromecast video on this. That's like an hour and a half long. I want, was it Joseph Anderson did the 4-hour video on Fallout 76 bugs?
I think so.
I want a 12-hour one of those. But the other part of me is going, man, I hope this comes out and is absolutely fantastic. Because it's not good form to wish ill on a game, really.
Yeah, and even just selfishly, like, this is absolutely, like, top level, kind of like my perfect game.
Yeah.
And for so many other people like me, I know it is the same.
God, you're insane.
That's why I like space. I like exploration, building ships, the faction stuff like that is totally up my alley. So, yeah, man, I hope they pull it off. But certainly a quick look through the internet does show that, shorthand communication via blasting, just little blurts of meaning, like Starfield is just an ugly No Man's Sky. It does show that, you open yourself up to comparison, reduction, and ridicule a hell of a lot. And it's just interesting how things spread a little bit more differently now than they used to in the past.
Absolutely.
But I suppose, even for that, like, PC Gamer needs clicks. Like, they did one article just being like, there's no way any of this is interesting. And then another article saying, I hope the 1,000 Planets are actually boring.
Oh, yeah.
That's evidently somebody who's just, like, the writer there thinking, like, no, I actually...
Yeah.
I want the NASA dude flying about trying to find a cool thing experience.
Yeah,
that's what some people genuinely want from the game.
That's been the PC Gamer standard recently. It is take games discourse, have one editor do an op-ed, or one writer rather do an op-ed on, one side of the coin, and then shortly after have another person do an op-ed on the other side of the coin. And as far as I can tell, it is completely genuine that it is just like staff members with differences of opinion. And it does have the ultimate effect that PC Gamer kind of play both sides, but from the individual viewpoint of the writers. So it is like, basically it's almost the good way to look at it. You go, oh, what are some people saying? What are other people saying?
Yeah.
The truth is probably somewhere in the middle. Or at least here's two fears or two assumptions that you have to work on. Because I think we're it's actually quite annoying. I mean, it's good for all of the punditry online, but it's a long time from, is the game good? What's the game out of a 10? Is it a 7 or an 8? It's an 8, I'll go buy it. We've certainly come a long way since then. Now here's 47 essays on what a video game could mean to you, or what its impact on the future of video games could have before anyone's allowed to buy it. God, I love it.
That's how it's changed. But okay, let me know what you think about Starfield. That's it for us. Lots more gaming stuff to talk about soon, so see you next time.